Welcome to another episode of BarryTsGarage, and today we have a conversation with Alan Travis. Many of you have surely seen Alan either in their shorts. Some of them are very interesting, the little short videos, and many cars, some of which you're seeing behind him in a minute. We've featured many of them, and we're closing in on doing all of them. Alan has a spectacular collection of antique cars, and we're going to talk to him about his general collection and also ask some specific questions that have come up from you all on YouTube, making comments and asking questions. So here we go. Hey, Alan, welcome.
Thank you.
I'm welcoming you to your place. This is a beautiful thing. Before we get started answering some questions, I think I'd like to just kind of give people have an idea, give them a little bit of background on your interest in old cars and classic cars, racing, and let's find out where that started. So can you give us a little brief, not from when you were 3, but maybe a little more than 3 years old? But
I can start at 5 if you let me go get a book real quick.
Okay.
My first car memory was in the 50s. I would read the Sunday newspaper, Arizona Republic, and then they had a section for kids that you could write poems and all that kind of stuff, and it was by the crossword puzzles. They had car ads back there, kind of comical car ads. And what I was doing in the 50s, as 3 and 4 years old, I would cut out these car ads, and these are the exact ones I cut out.
Oh, wow.
And every Sunday you had one. And they were all different kinds of cars.
Wow.
And then by 1960, my grandfather, who was interested in what I was doing, decided to look and see what I was doing. And he found that these ads were all from the Tad Burness book. So in about 1959 or 60, my grandfather bought me this book.
Oh, okay.
And in my elementary handwriting, which is still probably better than it is today, I wrote a list of the cars that I wanted to have when I was 4 and 5 years old.
That's crazy. Wow.
So I guess I started working on cars when I was 4 or 5.
That's a way more complete and documented answer than I was expecting.
Yeah.
But very good. Well, okay, so let's jump ahead a little bit where you actually purchased your first car of interest.
My parents told me when I was 14, as long as I had enough money to buy a new car, because they only wanted a new car in their driveway, I could buy my own car. So I bought my first car, and a year and a half before I was able to drive it. It was a 1972 or 73 Plymouth Duster 340.
Oh, good.
And then since I couldn't really drive it yet, they were having a contest called the Plymouth Troubleshooting Contest at our school. So I decided to enter that. And since I had a Plymouth car, I took it apart, I put it back together again, and I learned everything about it so that when the troubleshooting contest happened, yes, I won. And I still wasn't even able to drive my car yet legally.
Yeah, you are like, what, 14 or 15 years
Right.
old? That's wild.
So and then I started making and restoring Dune buggies and that kind of stuff. And by 17 or 18 years old, I was racing the Baja 1000, the Parker 400, the Mint 400, 18, 19, 20 years old, and motorcycles and quads and ATCs and all that kind of stuff too. And I would wreck those and I would rebuild them and, restore them again, get a new frame. So by the time I was 20, I had a lot of cars under my belt already that I had done.
You were right into it. And what's interesting is a lot of people would maybe buy a good car and maybe make a few little modifications, but you were next level, just taking them all the way apart.
I wanted to earn the right to own every vehicle I had. So I would wreck the motorcycle so I could repair them. I would, endo the off-road race cars so I could learn to TIG weld it. And so I was always working on it. I didn't just keep buying new things. I would learn how to restore. And initially, like the Dune buggy and the race car thing, you would buy things and bolt it on. And even in our hobby today, we could have a Model T, for example, in the antique car hobby. Mm-hmm. But there's catalogs. There's 6 or 8 companies in the United States, and maybe 10 in the world, that you can buy virtually every new part in a Model T and bolt it on.
Right.
Well, I don't like that. I want to analyze what the situation is and create that part, restore that part out of the raw materials. So I choose cars that are one of a kind, and challenging rare cars one of a kind.
Well, indeed, you have done that. You have definitely done that. Now, let's just, as a very quick overview, your collection here, and we don't have to get into each one, but give me the kind of the groupings and the ages and what you generally have right now.
Well, the motorized vehicles, I started in 1897, and I finish with, in this room, there's about 20 of them, about 1915, and I have iconic stages of vehicles. So I'm very, very, very selective in what I choose. I want the most iconic 1902, 1903, 1904. You know, what was the ultimate vehicle to have at that point, with a direction of maybe racing it or competing with it, because that's what the excitement was.
Sure.
Not for a family hauler. There's no real family haulers in here. These are performance vehicles. These are the McLarens of the day, you know, for that 20-year period of time.
Sure. As you are interested in how everything works, when you take something apart and put it back together, you understand how it works. So on the engineering side of it for you, or innovation and experimentation part, obviously comes through.
I love to completely put my mind in the same mindset as the engineer at the time that made the car. And the way I do it is, I have 8,500 original books and magazines from 1895 to 1915. I have most things that were published in America, England, France, and Germany. So if I'm working on a 1903 something or other, I'll get out 100 of my hardbacks, softbacks, magazines, and I put my mind in 1903. When I'm working on the things, I read the technical documents, I look at the technical diagrams, and I try not to look at my 1904 stuff, because that always shoots you in the foot, because in 1904, they changed this thing to this thing. And then your mind says, I want to look for one of those because it solved this problem. I wouldn't have to work so hard. But I stay with the year that I'm restoring.
Right.
And then I'm really proud of what I achieve and get done. And when I'm ready to start it, I'm looking forward to all the things they were looking forward to in, for example, 1903.
Right. That is awesome. Yeah, you don't want to accidentally go in the future.
No, you don't.
You have to deal with the problems of the present.
Right.
That's awesome.
So all my cars are as authentic as possible to how they operate.
Okay.
And then if they made a part out of bronze or aluminum or chrome moly, which at that time was chrome vanadium, I try to use the same materials if I have to remake a part. If you use a spectrograph, in general, you'll be able to see that everything is pretty much exactly like it was. So I don't add a bunch of windshields and doors and tops and scoops, and these cars are really what they were, with the same experience possibility as what it was 120 years ago.
That's fantastic.
And even if the car, and I'm working on a car like that one I just finished, it's a 1906, the Sizaire, and maybe it only really goes on cruising speed 40 or 50 miles an hour, and maybe if I push it to go faster. But even that 40 is far, far more exciting than driving my Lotus race car that can go 200. I want to go 40 in that 1906 race car and figure out how to operate that.
Right.
And I'm just as satisfied as could be with that speed for that vehicle.
Well, that's a great perspective to have. And so any of you watching, queue up the playlist of Alan Travis' collection. There are many videos on these cars he's referencing. So if this has kind of caught your attention, please enjoy yourselves. All right, well, let me jump into a couple questions. People have made some either comments or questions about some of the videos we've already made.
Okay.
The first one is referencing the Scripps piston. And I know you had to you rebuilt that engine after 110 years or whatever, so we had it in pieces. They're wondering about the rings, the conforming rings that we showed there, and wondering if that engine would have been smoking at all when it was originally built, or if there's any difference in the rings.
It wasn't smoky for the 5 years that I used it. It was pretty good. Okay. The oil ring, it wasn't certainly as good as modern today. Mm-hmm. They're not total seal rings,
right?
But they do overlap some.
Okay.
As long as you don't overfill those old engines,
Yep.
You know, the crankcases are pretty tall and the pan is pretty low, and you're only firing oil into the mains for the most part. And then you have sump trays where the crankshaft is dipping in. And as long as you don't have too much oil in there where the rod end is dipping far more than it's supposed to,
right,
they're pretty clean.
Okay.
And you're not spending a lot of RPM. You're spending a 1,500 to 2,500 RPM.
Yeah.
So no, it's not smoky. The sleeve valve cars from 120 years ago, those are all smoky.
Yes.
But I don't think there's a single car that I have that you could tell if you're casually in a car behind me that it's smoking.
You work as they should.
I'll give you another answer if you want.
Yeah.
My Bugatti is an overhead valve, all ball bearing camshaft. It could and can smoke because it's got a giant oil pump on the head. And that oil pump can have as much as half of an inch of oil in that head, and they can only go down through the valve guides or a small little port on the back of the head. So there's times when I first started it, if I haven't started it for a while, that it could emit an odor but not an oil film. Why not an oil film? Because I use some smokeless oil in that car to kind of cheat. Because when you first start that one, that oil has had a chance to go down those valve stems, which are still very, very good, but there's a half inch of oil that is surrounding that valve stem.
Right.
So I don't like that.
No.
So I use on the oiler, on the top oiler for the head on the Bugatti, smokeless oil. And then when you prime the car, when you first start one, you filled up little voids manually. So I fill it with something that at least it won't smoke, that it mixes with the other oil.
Okay.
But in normal running, it doesn't even smoke.
Right. Excellent. Oh, that's good. Well, things you have to think about in these old cars, right? Here's a random question about a car that you don't have, I don't believe. Someone was enjoying these old cars, but wondering if you had heard the sound. Have you ever been in the presence of a running 1905 Fiat Isotta, which is apparently a 225 horsepower car?
Well, Isotta is a Fraschini.
Okay.
So in Fiat is a different company.
Okay, so maybe the question's a
so
little bit
it's
confusing.
two fabulous marks.
Okay.
No, and no, I haven't.
Okay.
That's like the Beast of Turin is the Fiat.
Okay.
And that's a 700 or 800 cubic inch or more size engine, like my big Renault is.
Right.
Those are fabulous cars.
Yeah.
Both those two. Those are the ultimate, and those are factory cars. Those aren't consumer cars.
Yeah.
But those would be an ultimate car. Every morning, if I get up early, I look out the front window and see if anybody's dropped one of those off.
See, it'd be a large truck. Well, I'm sure someone just heard a reference about it.
Yeah,
and,
those are amazing.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So here's a question about the Sizaire-Naudin.
All right.
And that is the dual spark plugs.
Yep.
They're wondering, do you get any flame or explosion colliding or spark knock in an engine like that?
Well, they're firing exactly at the same time.
Okay.
And then I do have on the dash, I do have a lever that I can go up to 32 degrees of advance or down to 4 degrees of advance. So it could knock all day long if you wanted it to, if you were constantly flooring it, which it doesn't have a gas pedal, but if you're constantly advancing the cam.
Right.
So it's got a control that I can make sure that it's not having that issue.
Okay.
But all the old cars, other than the Renault has centrifugal advance on its magneto. The rest of them are manually controlled.
Okay.
And any of them, if you have maximum timing, including the 1897 Didion Bouton explosion trike, if I put the timing fully advanced and I start pedaling it, it'll kick back far enough, it'll stop and throw me off the handlebars
Wow.
in the 1897. So timing is a big issue.
Right, right.
But never would you have an explosion. No,
it's not an issue because of the two spark plugs, though.
No, the two spark plugs don't make any difference. It's burning the mixture on two parts of the intake chamber.
Okay.
And those flames are coming together perfectly happy.
Yeah. Yeah, they don't get angry with each other.
And there's never a chance of one firing before the other one.
Right.
So if you didn't have control of that, that'd be a big issue.
Yeah.
because you could have two spark plugs, but if one was too far advanced, no matter what the retarded spark plug did, you're already knocking with the first one that's too far advanced.
Right.
So it's not going to do that.
Okay.
And it's a modern magneto. It was made in 1905.
Of course, very modern. Oh, goodness, I love it. Well, many people saw the little short video I made on the spark plugs that you were using with that. And you mentioned that you hadn't checked yet to see if they were platinum or not, because you hadn't rebuilt them yet. Someone was questioning, is it even possible they could have been platinum?
Yeah, because all of the magneto points were platinum.
Is that right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so someone needs to dig into their
I can
history.
even show you that I have 2 or 3 sets of points in most of these cars, and they're, I believe, pure platinum. It could be platinum plated, but it might be pure platinum.
Mm-hmm.
You know, these weren't consumer vehicles.
Right.
These were the ultimate things, the ultimate expression. Only 1 in 1,000 people even had a car.
Right. Never mind a top of the mountaintop car.
Yeah, so they're not trying to save any money.
No.
And they already knew platinum for the magnetos and for the timers was the only material possible. There was quite a few plugs that had platinum in their electrodes.
Okay.
And I can simply tell, for the most part, with a magnet.
Okay, right.
That's all I really probably have to do. If it's magnetic, it's a steel, iron, vanadium, something like that. If it does not conduct, it's probably either tungsten or it's platinum.
Interesting.
And they had all kinds of plating materials back then too, so it could even be a plated.
Well, and as we've noted in some of the cars we've already done videos on, these makers definitely were carefully choosing a given metal for a given job, whether it was part of the engine or accessories or anything else. It seemed like they were very choosy and very, very carefully directing that.
Even for a production car, and a production car might have only been 20 cars for a whole year.
Mm-hmm.
They would use the best materials. And they use the best materials because there's not model years in 1899, 1890, 1901, 1902, 1903. These were lifetime cars. They expected if they worked this hard building these vehicles, they would last a lifetime.
Right.
There's no reason to get another one.
Right.
So the materials, in fact, I've never found rust in 40 years in a really old car. I've never found that. But if you find a 55 Chevy somewhere, or a Porsche 356, you're going to be replacing panels and rusted period pieces the whole time you're doing the restoration.
Wow.
You're never going to find that in these. They use bronzes, they use coppers, they use vanadium steels, they use cast steel and cast iron based on where it was being used.
Yeah, aluminum, I guess.
There was a lot of, even the crankcase from the 1897 DDO has aluminum crankcase. So things that you don't think were around then, yes, they were around. And on their bronzes and their coppers and that kind of material, they had bronzes that were harder than steel.
Wow.
Some of the bronzes back then, you can't even hardly remachine it. It's so hard. They knew the right amount of tin, the right amount of copper, the right amount of zinc.
Yeah.
They created some really nice materials because of the railroad industry and because of the military industry. The Sizaire has got non-detachable heads. Okay, so the bolts, the nuts that you see on the top of it and they're giant. They're a 1-inch thread in a metric size, which is 22 millimeters or something.
Mm-hmm.
Those are keeping the valve cage cap on.
Okay.
So it's got a 3-inch or 3¼ inch intake valve. So that whole piece of steel, it's 1 inch thick with those 3 22 millimeter nuts are just keeping that cage in there.
Okay.
That's all. But those nuts are probably strong enough to bolt down to the crankcase to bolt the jugs on.
Right.
But again, the head actually doesn't come off. But that valve cage is so giant on that overhead valve on that car, it looks like it's a head. It's not.
Yeah, well, when one cylinder is over 1,300 cc's, that's great. Can anyone explain why the spark generators have a ball shape to them?
I have an original Rockoff in the other room from 1884.
Okay.
It's got a much prettier spark when it's rounded.
Okay.
And a dirty spark if it's in the air, if it's just flat topped.
Okay.
I don't think it makes a lot of difference inside of an engine
Yeah.
if it's ball shaped or cut off square. I know when I move the electrode inside of a spark plug, if it's not uniform shape, I'll make it uniform shape. But I'm not really concerned about that shape being flat topped or round. But I want it to be consistent.
Right.
So if it's a triple plug, if it's a triple electrode ground plug, it has the same chances of igniting any of those three legs.
Right.
Because that's what it was designed to do.
Sure. Yeah.
But I don't really care if it's a round contact or.
Yeah.
But I guess it would be better for the electrode if it was rounded, because it's going to emit its spark several spots and not burn it away if there's a sharp corner.
Sure. Right.
So it depends on where the contact would actually be on the spark.
Yeah. It kind of gives it more meat to work with, so to speak.
It would keep the spark plug a little bit cooler if you had a thin electrode, but most of the rebuildable spark plugs back 120 years ago are 1/8 of an inch diameter center electrode. That's pretty thick.
Yeah.
It's not going to heat up very much.
Right. Now, someone else is challenging, as much as I know Alan, you have to be brave to challenge Alan on anything historical. So he says, those plugs cannot be original. The original plugs had a square drive, not a hex drive. Hex drive was not commonly used until after World War I.
That's completely wrong. I have hundreds and hundreds of original spark plugs, and they're all hex.
Okay.
I don't have anything. Even my original mica plugs, even my Splittendorfs, even my 1897 DDON spark plugs are hex. Everything's hex. Now maybe in tractors or maybe glow plugs for a I don't know. Everything in here is hex. Everything in my collection, and I could get 2 crates of original spark plugs. I have hundreds of them that I use.
We'll get into that someday. All right. Well, sir, thank you for your question or your comment, but we beg to differ with you. In fact, it would be great if someone could show us even a square drive.
I don't know that I've ever even seen one.
Yeah.
But I can lay out more than 100 different ones. And I have Thomas Edison plugs. I have Lodge. I have every kind. 50 years worth of collecting. Because if somebody has 10 of a certain kind of plug, I'll get them. If they're 18 millimeter or, if they're pipe thread, because I can use them in these.
Yeah.
And then I put them on my spark plug testing machine. I turn it up to 100 pounds of compression or 100 pounds of pressure or 120 pounds, see if they still spark. I love spark plugs, but I've never seen anything besides hex.
Okay. You're an engineer. You have an engineering mind. And you're going through these old cars and sometimes resolving a problem that comes up. How does an engineer tackle these problems and questions?
Well, an engineer doesn't think first to go online and see what he can buy or what catalog to look in. Right. He analyzes the part and then in a few minutes figures out a way to fix it. But a smart engineer goes for a walk or a bicycle ride or does something like that and thinks about it a little bit more. Okay. And then he figures out a second way to attack that problem. Okay. And then maybe feeds the dog or something and figures out a third way. Then he might go to sleep and figure out ways or methods 4, 5, and 6. And then usually one of the last ones is always the right one that you need to do.
Okay.
So
that tells me that a good engineer is also not going to be satisfied with the first answer.
Nope.
That comes to mind.
No, because it's never the way you're going to really do it. So I could answer 100 of your questions in 2 seconds give you an answer on how you could do it. Mm-hmm. But if you asked me those 100 questions or wrote them down and asked me in a week how I would solve those 100 problems, I would probably give you better and different answers on each one.
Delaunay.
The Delaunay-Belleville?
Yes. They were just wanting more information on the grease cups on the suspension and whether that's unusual. That seemed to, I think it was grease cups on this.
Almost all the cars have that.
Okay.
And grease cups are much better than greasers because you can fill a grease cup with an ounce of grease. Mm-hmm. And then every 300 miles, you can turn the grease cup, the little toggle on the top, 1/16 of a turn.
Okay.
Pressurize a little bit more in.
Oh.
And, and even if you pressurize it where it gets tight, after you drive it a few hundred miles, as that kingpin moves up and down or whatever that it's lubricating, it continues to come out slowly.
Okay.
Like a pair of vice grips, if you clamp two pieces of metal together, and then that one piece of metal gets smaller because maybe you're soldering something between it, that clamping motion continues to push the oil in or the grease in.
Okay.
It's grease.
Yeah.
Over a period of time even.
Okay, so actually I had not asked you about that. I didn't understand that the grease cups are keeping grease under some pressure.
Some pressure.
Not much, I guess.
Some pressure.
But it's more than just gravity.
More than zero.
Yeah.
You know, gravity, they would not flow. Grease doesn't flow unless you live in Arizona.
Yeah.
But in general, it doesn't.
Okay.
So all these cars, and some have 100 of them, even the motorcycles,
Really?
they have lots and lots of them.
Oh, okay.
There's a few places, like on Magnetos, they have a little cup with a little lid.
Right.
You put a couple drops in there.
Yeah, we've seen that.
Because the Magneto needs so little lubricant, it slowly permeates kind of a sponge-y material and then goes where it needs to go.
Okay.
But not suspensions and front ends and that kind of stuff.
Interesting.
It's under pressure a little bit.
Okay.
And it's a better system than a greaser that you'd have today. But a greaser that you have today is more complicated than you think it is because there's a little ball bearing at the end of it.
That's right.
And then when you pressurize it, that ball bearing allows the grease to go in. And when you remove the grease gun, the ball bearing goes back up again.
Yeah.
So even those are pressurized a little bit, but they don't hold much.
Right.
So it's the same principle from 100 years ago with the little toggles on the top that keep a little bit of positive pressure for a while.
Okay. Well, that's really interesting to know that. Well, very good. Well, that wraps up the questions we have for today.
Okay.
And that was a lot of fun. And Alan, thank you for making yourself available. You know what? This is all part of, sharing history, and with all your, obviously, documentation, all your books and everything. It's wonderful that instead of looking and hoping you can find something online, because on a lot of your cars, there's little to nothing. In fact, I've looked up one or two of your cars and all I found is a video we did.
Yeah.
So these are part of history, but thank you for preserving history the way you do. We will plan to have Alan come back another time as you guys continue to make comments or ask questions. Alan, I love sharing his knowledge and sharing his passion for this part of this era of car history. So we welcome your questions, comments, and so on. Thanks again, and we'll see you again soon.